In 1966, John Lennon said this: "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and I will be proved right. We are more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me." Today, we're going to talk about what Jesus says in John chapter 15, and that is that the world is going to hate us. Now, when I was doing the research for this lesson today, I was shocked at what I found, because I thought what I would find when I did my research is that so many more people hate Christianity in our culture today than they did years ago. But that actually is not the case. Statistically, people feel about the same way about Christianity in 2018 as they did in 1988. The difference is the people who do hate Christianity in our culture feel much more empowered and feel like they have a voice to express their hatred. And so you hear a whole lot more about it in the media, although in reality there's not a whole lot more hatred now than there was 25 years ago. Here's what I want to do. I want to start this group by just stopping the video now, putting a couple of questions on the screen, and asking you to basically discuss this. In what ways in our culture do you see hatred toward Christianity? Who are the groups that seem to hate us the most? And why do you think that is so prevalent in today's culture? So talk about those things. The questions will come up on the screen, and then we'll come back in and jump right back into the text. I'm going to begin reading in John chapter 15, beginning in verse 18. Jesus says, "When the world hates you, remember it hated me before it hated you." The first thing I want you to notice is he doesn't say if the world hates you. He says when the world hates you. One of the things we have to come to grasp with as disciples of Jesus Christ is that when we live our lives separate and apart from culture, we are going to be hated by the world. It's not an if, it's a when. And I think one of the problems in the American church is sometimes we want to snuggle up so close to culture that they like us and that we're popular in the world. Trust me, Jesus never said we're supposed to be popular in the world. We're supposed to be set apart enough that we have such a different worldview that either people are tired of the world and want to try us as something different because their world isn't working, or they are not going to like us because we're living in such a way that is very different from them. So we need to get out of our minds this whole idea that we need to be popular in culture and understand that culture is not going to like us because we're so different as Christians. But we'll explain all that in this passage over the next few minutes. He says, "The world would love you if you belong to it, but you don't. I chose you to come out of the world, and so it hates you. Do you remember what I told you? A servant is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. And if they had listened to me, they would listen to you. The people of the world will hate you because you belong to me, for they don't know God who sent me. They would not be guilty if I had not come and spoken to them, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Anyone who hates me hates my Father too. If I hadn't done such miraculous signs among them that no one else could do, they would not be counted guilty. But as it is, they all saw that I had what I did, and yet hated both of us, me and my Father. This is fulfilled what the Scripture said, they hated me without cause. But I will send you the Counselor, the Spirit of truth. He will come to you from the Father and will tell you all about me. And you must also tell others about me because you have been with me from the beginning. I have told you these things so that you won't fall away. For you will be expelled from synagogues, and the time is coming when those who kill you will think they are doing God's service. This is because they have never known the Father or me. Yes, I'm telling you these things now so that when they happen, you will remember I warned you. I didn't tell you earlier because I was going to be with you for a little while longer." Now, you have to understand, the disciples are absolutely terrified about what is going to happen. Jesus has told them enough that they understand that he is about to die on a cross. They understand that their lives are about to be turned upside down. And now Jesus at the very end says, "I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear, and I didn't tell you earlier because I'm waiting to the very end to tell you this." And that is, you're not going to be liked by the world. And by the way, if you'll notice the way he defines the world, it's not only the secular world, but it's the religious world. It's the other religions besides Christianity are going to hate Christians. So let's go back and let's look through this text, and we're going to ask two questions today. The first one is, why does the world hate us? The second one is, what is our response? So the first one, why does the world hate us? There's three reasons. The first one is because we are different from the world. Look what he says back in verse 19. The world would love you if you belong to it, but you don't. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. So interesting to me that Jesus says here, look, if you just compromised and acted like the world would like you. Boy, should that be a challenge for today's church and for us as individual Christians. If the world likes us and we're accepted too much by the world, that's probably a sign we haven't been out of the world the way God has called us to, and we're not living the lifestyle we're supposed to. He says we're going to be hated because we're different. Now, let me explain to you how that works. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul gives us this word picture. He says this in 2 Corinthians 2, verses 14 through 16. He says, you are the aroma of Christ. Your aroma is a beautiful smell of salvation to those who are being saved. But to those who are perishing, it is the stench of their own spiritual death. Listen to what Paul is saying. I live my life as a Christian. And what happens is some people will watch my life and they'll go, wow, I'm amazed by your life, and I'll encourage them. Those are Christians. But those that are not Christians, he says what's going to end up happening is they're going to watch your life, and your life is going to remind them of their own spiritual death. They're going to be convicted in their spirit by that, and they're going to hate you for it. Now, let me explain to you what Paul is doing there. Paul was actually using an illustration from the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire would come in and take over a country like Israel, they would have a victory parade down the main street of the biggest, most important city in that country. And in that parade would be political officials, military officials, the army, and then at the very end were basically the POWs, the people that they had captured in war that belonged to that country, and they would parade them through town. And when they had this victory parade, they always had an incense. It was the only time they burned that incense. And when they would burn that incense, it was a very peculiar smell. To the Roman citizen, it was the smell of their victory. To the person who was a captive, or to that country that had been taken over, it was the smell of their death. It was the smell of Roman victory. And so it's the same smell, but to one it's a sweet fragrance, to the other it's the smell of death. That's the picture that Paul is using here. He's saying, look, what happens is I'm going to live my life. I'm not out banging people over the head with a Bible, telling them they're not going to go to hell if they don't come to Jesus. I'm not out there being judgmental. I'm just living my life. But when I live my life apart from the world, in values, in the way I think, in the way I operate, when I'm not operating according to the world system, what ends up happening is the world system hates me for it. It's not anything I've done, it's just my life convicts them of their sin, and when they're convicted, they turn around and hate me. And Jesus says, all you have to do to be liked by the world is just belong to it. But we can't do that as believers. And so he says, because of that, you are going to end up being hated by the world. So the first reason the world hates us is because we are different from the world. The second reason, though, is because we belong to Jesus Christ. Notice what he says here. He says, do you remember what I told you? A servant is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. Now, this phrase, a servant is not greater than his master, we're in John 15. Where did he use that the first time? At the beginning of the evening in John 13, when he was washing their feet, he was saying a servant is not greater than his master. So if I'm willing to wash your feet, you should wash one another's feet. You should serve one another. He's now taking that phrase and reapplying it here and saying it's the same way with the way the world's going to treat me. If the world hates me and the world treats me that way, guess what? You're not greater than your master. They're going to treat you the same way. So in other words, because they hate me, they're going to persecute you. We shouldn't take that personally. We should understand that what happens is, what naturally happens, is when I live my life for Jesus Christ and I'm seen as different from the world, it's not that they're hating me per se, they're hating what we represent, Jesus Christ. They hate Him, they take it out on us. I want you to think about those 11 disciples that night. I want you to think about what they were going through. And Jesus is saying, listen, the day is coming. Remember what we read in the beginning of chapter 16? The day is coming where people are going to think they're doing God's will when they kick you out of the synagogue and kill you for your faith. And in fact, 11 of the 12 apostles ended up dying for their faith. Only one, John, died a natural death. What is Jesus saying? I'm about to go to a cross and die, and guess what? Because they hate me, they're going to hate you. Because they hate me, they're going to take it out on you. Did they do that in the New Testament? Absolutely. We saw the enemies of Jesus over and over again persecute the apostles and the disciples of Jesus Christ, and many of them died for their faith. We shouldn't expect it to be too much different today. Now, we don't live in a culture where we're going to die for our faith, but we are persecuted. We're made fun of. We're seen as being ignorant and stupid. We're kept out of certain circles because of our faith. We shouldn't be surprised that the world takes it out on us because they don't like Jesus for what He represents. We should not be surprised. The third reason the world hates us is because we belong to the Father. Notice what Jesus says here, and I'm not going to read all of this again. He says, but they hate me, therefore they hate the Father who sent me. Jesus says, if you hate me, you hate the Father. The two are as one. You can't hate one and love the other. And it's so interesting to me in our culture how many people I find who say, oh, I'm spiritual and I'm religious, and they've kind of created this own religion that serves them. But when you bring up the name of Jesus Christ, they get defensive. They don't want to hear about it. And it's amazing to me how they want to love God, but they want to hate Jesus. And Jesus says you can't do both. You can't do both. You're either going to love God and love me, or you're going to hate God and hate me. But you can't hate me and love God. That's impossible because we're one. We are the same. And if you're going to hate me, you're going to hate God. Here's what I think is going on in our culture. We live in such a culture that hates authority. We don't want anyone telling us what to do. We don't want anyone telling us how to live our lives. And what people perceive of Jesus, it's not true, but what they perceive is that Jesus is all about all these rules, and you got this big Bible, and all it is a bunch of do's and don'ts, and Jesus trying to tell me how to live my life and what to do. That's not true at all. But that's what they perceive. And because of that, they don't want to accept Jesus because they don't want Jesus telling them how to live their lives. And so because of that, they end up hating Jesus. And Jesus says, by definition then, you will hate the Father. And so He's laid it out for us pretty plainly. If we're going to be separate from the world, we're going to be hated by the world. There's going to be a lot of people who don't like us. Why? Because we're different from them, because we represent Jesus, we represent heaven, and they don't like what that represents, and so their hatred for Christ they take out on us. And they just don't want an authority figure telling them what to do, and they see us as representing this God that's going to lay all these rules on them that they don't want to follow. And so they resent us, they don't like us, they make fun of us. That should not surprise us. So we're going to stop right here. We're going to throw up 2 or 3 questions on the screen for you that I want you to talk about. And then we're going to come back and answer that second question: how should we respond to the world's hatred of us? So what should our response to the world hating us be? There's so many responses that we could talk about. What I want to do is kind of keep it within the context of John chapter 15 and 16 and talk to you basically about 3. Okay, the first one is awareness. We just need to be fully aware that we're not meant to be popular among the world, that we're not meant to snuggle up so close to the world that they can't see a difference between them and us. We're supposed to be countercultural. We're supposed to be the called out holy people of God. And when we do that, there's going to be a certain portion of the population that aren't going to like us. We don't need to be codependent on the world and need the world to like us. We have an audience of one. The only person we need to be concerned about what they think of us is Jesus Christ. Everyone else needs to respond from there. And so we just need this awareness that we're going to walk in Jesus, we're going to walk in faithfulness, and we need to know that means we're going to be at odds with certain people in our culture. We need to understand that, feel comfortable with that. Don't seek it out. Don't try to be in any way opposed to culture, but just know it's going to happen. We're not trying to be antagonists. We're just trying to live out our faith, and that's going to put us at odds with the world. Second thing is we have to understand that we have the responsibility to speak out when God calls us to speak out. Remember what Jesus said here? He said, I will send you the counselor, the Spirit of truth. He will come to you from the Father and will tell you all about me. And you must also tell others about me because you have been with me. What does he say? He says, this world's going to hate you. What's your response? Tell them about me anyway. Now, I'm not saying we go in and we pick fights with unbelievers. I'm not saying we go in saying, hey, we're right and you're wrong, and we got the truth and you don't. I'm not saying we're judgmental. I'm not saying we turn them off. And if we act in certain ways, we will certainly turn them off. That's not what I'm saying at all. Don't hear that. Here's what I am saying. I'm saying that what we need to do is we need to be ready. And when the world comes along and the world hates us and the world is making fun of us and the world is criticizing us, there's going to be a time to speak up. And we need to know the Word. We need to be ready to go, because I promise you, if we're out there among the world and we're being salt and light, we're going to be questioned why we act the way we act. And we're supposed to have an answer and be ready. So that's the second thing, is we don't need to shy away and be scared or try to be popular with the world. We need to be the presence of Christ. And then when He calls us to talk, we need to be ready to talk. Third, and a part of this process is this: we need to love people. The whole context of John 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 is Jesus' love and our love for one another and for the world. In John chapter 13, He says we're supposed to love one another. That's the way the world's going to know you're my disciples. We are called in chapter 14 and in chapter 15, just before this, to love other people. We are called to love. Love trumps hate. When the world hates us, how do we respond? With love. When you love people and you're praying for people and it comes time to speak the truth, if you're loving them extravagantly, they usually don't get overly offended, and they'll usually let you speak into their lives. Not everyone. Not everyone. Some people are going to hate you. But when you return hate with love, that is what gives us the opportunity to speak the truth of Christ into people's lives and lead people to Christ and change culture. So I want to paint a picture for you here at the end, and then I'll turn it back to you for some closing questions. Here's the picture. I'm living among the world. I'm the aroma of Christ. As I'm the aroma of Christ, just my presence and the way I live my life, being so different from the world, is going to cause certain people to dislike me, to be jealous of me, to hate me, to resent me. They're going to take it out on me. Jesus promised that. It's not me, it's Jesus they hate, but they're going to take it out on me in some sort of act of hatred or act of resentment or act of dishonor to me. I've got a choice at that point. Do I act like them and hate them back? Do I act like them and I'm ugly back? Or am I going to respond the way Jesus asked us to in John chapter 15 and 16 and respond in love? Now, here's the kicker. Are you ready? When I respond in love, Paul tells us in Romans 12, it's like heaping burning coals on their head. In other words, what it does is it so convicts their spirit that when I return hate with love, if anything's ever going to break them and cause them to come to Christ, it's going to be that act right there. Jesus told us in Matthew 5, He says, pagans can love their friends. What sets a Christian apart is when we love our enemies. When someone hates you and is ugly to you from the world, when I respond in love, when you respond in love, when we respond back to them and we give their hate back with love of Christ, love from us, it breaks them down and opens them up to hear the message of Jesus Christ. That's how we win the world to Christ. Let me tell you why we're not winning the world to Christ in today's culture. Number one, we have a tendency to not live separate from the world. We've compromised the way we live our lives so much that I don't think the world tells a big difference between a Christian and a worldly person anymore. That's the first reason. But the second reason is when we do live for Christ and they're ugly to us, we have a tendency to be ugly back. Well, that ruins our witness. They say, see, they're just like us. They're no difference from us. But when we respond and we give love back when we're hated, that breaks the world down. That's what breaks their spirit and allows God to come in and change their heart. And so what's our response? We have to know it's coming. We have to be ready with a proper response, the proper words, and we need to love people and respond to hate with love. That is God's plan to reach the world for Christ. We're going to close out right now. Got a few more questions for you on the screen. Answer those questions, pray for one another, and I hope you have a great group.